Poštovani gledalci, dobrodošli u Granice istoka. Ja sam Harun Karčić. Libija, nekad stabilna, perspektivna zemlja, poznata u arapskom svijetu, ali i šire kao biser Mediterana. Hiljade radnika iz brojnih država sa raznih strana svijeta radilo je i zaradilo u toj zemlji. Ali proteklih godina slika Libije suštinski je promijenjena. Centralne vlasti skoro da i nema. Doslovno svaki grad ima svoju miliciju, a te milicije se međusobno sukobljavaju. Odnosi između mnogobrojnih plemena i etničkih grupa nisu ništa bolji, jer su neka plemena bila favorizovana tokom Gaddafijeve vladavine, dok su druga bila marginalizovana. Otmice, ubistva i bombaški napadi sada su svakodnevnica. Sve to utječe na stanje sigurnosti. Stalne su politička nestabilnost i privredna neizvjesnost. Strani ulagači su se dobrim dijelom povukli iz Libije. U nastavku emisije ćemo analizirati političku situaciju te zemlje, ali prije toga pogledajmo kratko podsjećanje na uspon i sunovrat Libije, od dolaska Muamera Gaddafija na vlast do pojavljivanja grupe ISIL.
Muamer Gaddafi i grupa pukovnika 1969. godine izveli su vojni udar protiv kralja Idriza. Gaddafi je tada bio mladi i harizmatični lider. Uživao je nevjerovatnu popularnost u zemlji, ali i širom arapskog svijeta. Obrazovanje i zdravstvo u toj zemlji je bilo besplatno. Država je subvencionirala prijevoz i kupovinu stanova. Međutim, tokom 80-ih Gaddafija su optuživali da financira oružane grupe koje su izvele niz bombaških napada i otmica aviona. Gaddafi je to smatrao ličnim doprinosom globalnoj borbi protiv imperijalizma, što je naljutilo svjetske lidere koji su Libiji nametnuli sankcije, a njega marginalizovali s međunarodne scene. Sankcije i međunarodna izolacija oslabile su libijsku ekonomiju i oborile životni standard. Osim toga, korupcija među političkom elitom, nefunkcionisanje državnih institucija i ekonomska kriza izazvali su revolt građana 2011. godine. Muamer Gaddafi je doživio neslavan i tragičan kraj. Uhvaćen je u rodnom Sirtu i linčovan. Veliki broj Libijaca širom zemlje su na sve te događaje gledali s dozom optimizma. Smatrali su to krajem 42-godišnje diktature i prilikom da država krene naprijed. Ustanak protiv Gaddafijevog režima urušio je državne institucije i sigurnosne snage, oštećena infrastruktura kao i naftna postrojenja. Nova vlast pokušala je pokrenuti stvari nabolje. Formirano je nacionalno tranzicijsko vijeće i preuređena vojska, održani su izbori i usvojen novi ustav. Međutim, euforija je bila kratkog daha. Naoružane grupe i plemena koja su zajedno ratovala protiv Gaddafijevih snaga ubrzo su se okrenuli jedno protiv drugih i razišli zbog nesuglasica o raspodjeli moći i viziji budućnosti Libije. Ogromne zalihe oružja koje su im ostale na raspolaganju od Gaddafijeve vojske samo su dodatno potpaljivale vatru. Problem je također bio što Libija nema dugu historiju centralizovane vlasti. Historijski ta je zemlja bila podijeljena na 3 autonomne oblasti. Tripolitanija na sjeverozapadu, Kirenaika na istoku i Fezan na jugozapadu zemlje. Tu su i brojne etničke i plemenske podjele. Arapi dominiraju na sjeveru zemlje, Tuarezi na zapadu, pleme Tebua na jugoistoku, a Berberi na sjeverozapadu. Uprkos međunarodnim naporima, do sada je bilo gotovo nemoguće nagovoriti mnogobrojne milicije, plemena i političke grupacije da polože oružje i prihvate vrhovnu vlast u Tripoliju. Zato Libija još ima 2 vlade. Prva je vlada nacionalnog jedinstva bazirana u Tripoliju koju podržava UN. Također uživa podršku nekih od najmoćnijih milicija u zemlji. A u Tobruku na istoku je predstavnički dom koji ne priznaje vladu u Tripoliju. Taj dom je postavio Halifu Haftara za šefa njihove vojske poznate kao Libijska nacionalna armija. Mirovnim sporazumom iz Maroka krajem 2015. formirano je predsjedničko vijeće kao vrhovna vlast u Libiji koje uživa podršku Ujedinjenih naroda. Međutim, to vijeće nema autoritet u cijeloj državi. Upravo taj politički i sigurnosni vakum koriste grupe poput ISIL-a, koja je uspostavila 3 odvojena vilajeta ili provincije od kraja 2014. godine. ISIL je sada u defanzivi, ali njegovo prisustvo dodatno je zakomplikovalo i onako zapetljanu političku situaciju u Libiji. Emir Skenderagić, Al Jazeera.
Jedan od ključnih igrača u Libiji je general Halifa Haftar. Njegove oružane snage kontrolišu Bengazi i druga okolna mjesta na istoku zemlje. Haftar je bio blizak saradnik Muamera Gaddafija. Zajedno su svrgnuli kralja Idriza 1969. godine. Došlo je do raskola između njih dvojice krajem 80-ih, nakon jedne neuspješne vojne ofanzive protiv susjednog Čada. Haftar je ubrzo prebjegao u Ameriku, gdje je, prema mnogim izvorima, usko sarađivao sa CIA-om protiv Gaddafija. Vraća se u Libiju 2011. godine i predvodi grupu pobunjeničkih snaga u borbi protiv Gaddafijevog režima. 2014. godine poziva Libijce da ustanu protiv izabrane vlade u Tripoliju, uspostavlja takozvanu Libijsku nacionalnu armiju i napada milicije lojalne Tripoliju. Ne priznaje vladu nacionalnog jedinstva, već samo zastupnički dom u Tobruku, na istoku zemlje. Ujedinjeni Arapski Emirati, Egipat, Francuska i Rusija neki su od zemalja koje ga podržavaju. O situaciji i promjenama u Libiji razgovaramo u nastavku emisije. Gošća u Granicama istoka je Rhiannon Smith, politička analitičarka i urednica internet stranice Libya Analysis. Rhiannon, thank you so much for joining us. Now, could you explain to our Balkan audience the current political climate in Libya? There are two competing governments, one in Tripoli and one in Tobruk, but who exactly is in charge and who or what is hindering the formation of a single government?
Yes, you're correct. The situation in Libya currently is very fractured between two competing governments in the east of the country and in the west. Now, this split happened in around 2014, and there has been this fractured environment with no one really controlling the whole country since then. In the west, in Tripoli, you have the Government of National Accord, which was created through a UN process, which is seen as a legitimate government. Then in the east, in Tobruk, you have the House of Representatives, which, to make things more confusing, is also partly legitimate as a parliament. However, it has not ratified the Government of National Accord, so you have two separate centres of power within the country. And part of the reason they have not been able to unite, as you mentioned, is because in the east there is a fairly controversial military leader called Halifa Haftar. Now, he has run a campaign against Islamist and jihadi groups in the east of the country, and he has gained a lot of power and momentum. And his allies do not want to become part of the unity government in Tripoli, because that is seen to be against Haftar and that would limit his power, as they are old enemies.
Halifa Haftar has been cozying up to the Russians. They have promised him weapons, and in return they plan to establish military bases in areas under his control. What exactly is Russia's interest in Libya?
So Russia has interest in Libya from a long time up under the Gaddafi regime. So to begin with, it has business and economic interest in the country. So this is part of the reason why it is in Russian interest economically to try and establish a foothold there. So it had infrastructure, oil and trade and transportation contracts, which when the revolution started in 2011, these were suspended. So that is one reason. The next is geopolitical, that if it is able to get some influence and a foothold in Libya through an ally like Haftar, then it will have greater influence over the Mediterranean, have a foothold within the Mediterranean region.
Right. Now why would the United Arab Emirates, Egypt and France want to support Halifa Haftar? What exactly are their interests, and what is the role of the United States in this entire story?
Well, so for Egypt and under President Sisi, they are really focused on their own geographical interests. So Libya forms a huge part of the border with Egypt, and Sisi is very keen to ensure that there is a sort of secular strongman who can protect the stability and prevent Islamist groups from infiltrating and influencing Egypt. So from Egypt's perspective, it's very much wanting to have a stable, secular style government on their western border. For the UAE, it's a similar concern in terms of they have a fairly strong anti-Islamist drive in the region. They are allied with Egypt, so this is a similar concern. They want to block rivals such as Qatar and Turkey from gaining a stronghold in Libya through the groups they support there. For France, this is slightly more complicated. So they do support the Libyan political agreement and the UN government in Tripoli. However, they have been supporting through special forces on the ground. They have been giving support to Halifa Haftar and his militias who are fighting against some of the Islamist and jihadi groups within Benghazi. So their support for Haftar is really in the more of the counter-terror vein rather than a political support. For the US, this remains the big question. So from what we've seen so far of Trump's presidency, we expect that he is more likely to support a sort of strongman authoritarian figure, which would be Haftar in this case, who has a strong anti-Islamist drive. However, he may not want Russia to have so much influence in Libya, and actually if Haftar is supported as a military general, that is likely to create more instability in the country. So the US, it's still very much up in the air as to what their policy will be going forward.
ISIL at one time had 3 self-proclaimed wilayats or provinces in Libya. Now they are, however, on the defensive. How would you assess the military might of ISIL in Libya?
Well, the strength of ISIS in Libya has been severely, cut back in the last few months due to the UN-supported and US-supported airstrikes and the Bunyan al-Massus operation in Sirte. So these were local Misratan militias from western Libya who, with US support, managed to take back the city of Sirte, where ISIS had a foothold, a stronghold, since late 2014. So this is significant because it means that ISIS has lost its main area of territorial control in Libya and therefore access to a lot of taxes and revenues that it was gaining from this area. However, this does not mean that ISIS in Libya is defeated, far from it. So there are still many Islamic State cells in Benghazi, in the south of Libya, and even still around Sirte. And these will continue to pose a problem. There will continue to be attacks. However, the important thing is that the territorial control is much reduced.
It has been 6 years since the February uprising and the toppling of Muammar Gaddafi. You have lived in Libya for a number of years. You travel there quite often. And when you speak to the average Libyan, do you see any nostalgic yearning for Gaddafi's era?
I think there is certainly more of that than there used to be. I don't want to overstate this because I think still, the majority of Libyans, they are now at the stage where they're looking for stability, and that's why we're seeing the rise in support for Haftar, this kind of authoritarian, no-nonsense approach. So I think there is a return, perhaps, to nostalgia of wanting a more authoritarian leader. However, I don't think that's really, doesn't mean that they still want Gaddafi. Yes, there is some nostalgia saying, oh, in those days certain things worked and this, that and the other. But I think that's always very easy to say, those times are also very bad. But certainly, yes, many Libyans are struggling to have a vision for their country and see a way of all these different parties uniting and having some form of stability. So yes, it's certainly a very rocky road, and things are perhaps more pessimistic than they were obviously in sort of 2012, 2013.
Well, Rhiannon, thank you so much for speaking to us. It was a pleasure having you.
You're very welcome. I'm very, very pleased to speak to you.
Bila je to Rhiannon Smith, politička analitičarka i urednica internet stranice Libya Analysis. Oružane milicije u Libiji koje ratuju međusobno bore se za kontrolu naftom bogatih područja koliko i za političku prevlast. Libija ima najveće dokazane rezerve nafte na afričkom kontinentu. Naftu je počela izvoziti 1961. godine. Nafta je žila kucavica libijske ekonomije. 96% državnih prihoda dolaze od prodaje nafte i naftnih derivata. Libija izvozi pretežno u zemlje Evropske unije, poput Italije, Španije, Francuske i Njemačke. Proizvodnja je drastično pala proteklih godina. U junu 2010. godine Libija je proizvodila 1,6 milijuna barela dnevno. U istom periodu naredne godine, u jeku ustanka protiv Muammara Gaddafija, proizvodnja nafte je spala na samo 80.000 barela. Godinu nakon ustanka, proizvodnja se oporavila i povećala na 1,4 milijuna barela, da bi 2013. ponovo pala na 1,2 milijuna barela dnevno. Već 2014. godine počinju žestoki sukobi između naoružanih milicija i zemlja tone u politički haos. Proizvodnja nafte pada na 240.000 barela dnevno. Zatim se blago povećala na 410.000 barela i opet pala na 310.000 barela po danu. Danas je kontrola naftnih postrojenja postala jedno od glavnih oružja u političkim previranjima za nadmoć u zemlji. Zbog pada u proizvodnji nafte, koja najviše doprinosi budžetu Libije, sve je manje novca za sigurnosne snage i obalnu stražu te zemlje. Upravo zbog toga, Libija je postala doslovno raj za organizovane bande, krijumčare ljudi, droge i oružja.
Ovo je Sredozemno more, jedna od glavnih ruta za izbjeglice i ekonomske migrante iz Afrike prema Europi. Prema broju mrtvih, prošla godina bila je najsmrtonosnija u novijoj historiji. Međunarodna organizacija za migrante saopćila je kako je više od 7.500 ljudi smrtno stradalo na izbjegličkim rutama širom svijeta, što je 20 po danu. Više od 5.000 ih se utopilo u vodama Mediterana. Broj stradalih je vjerovatno veći, jer se nekada dogodi da manja plovila potonu, a da o tome ne bude informacija. Od početka 2014. godine više od 500.000 izbjeglica stiglo je centralnom mediteranskom rutom sa sjevera Afrike u Italiju. Samo u 2016. godini bilo ih je blizu 180.000, što je najviše otkako je počela izbjeglička kriza. Jedan broj izbjeglica migranata krene u Europu iz Libije ili Tunisa, koji je još bliži italijanskom otoku Lampedusa. Opasni uvjeti na moru u zimskom periodu, prenatrpani čamci lošeg kvaliteta i loša oprema za spašavanje života povećavaju opasnost od prevrtanja, što putovanje čini mnogo opasnijim. Izbjeglice koje koriste Libiju kao tranzitnu rutu dolaze pretežno iz Eritreje, Senegala, Malija, Nigerije, ali i Iraka, Sirije, Palestine, Tunisa i Libije. Te izbjeglice najčešće ciljaju Italiju kao svoju primarnu destinaciju. Dok jedan broj njih ostaje u toj zemlji, drugi se uputi sjeverno ka Njemačkoj, Francuskoj i zemljama Beneluxa. Italijanska vlada je saopćila kako će povećati broj deportacija izbjeglica i migranata koji nemaju pravo ostati u toj državi, te će otvoriti nove centre za one koji će slati kući. Budući da je sporazum između Europske unije i Turske rezultirao drastičnim padom u dolasku izbjeglica istočno-mediteranskom rutom, Europska unija sada želi zaključiti slične sporazume sa 5 ključnih afričkih zemalja odakle dolaze izbjeglice. Unija se nada da će ti sporazumi biti gotovi prije proljeća, kada uobičajeno počne rasti broj izbjeglica koji preko Sredozemlja nastoje doći do Europe. Europska unija je na nedavnom samitu na Malti razradila novi plan pomoći Libiji. Prema tom planu, libijska vlada primit će 200 milijuna eura, uključujući sredstva za pojačanje obalske straže kako bi bila osposobljena da razbije bande krijumčara i da vraća nazad izbjegličke brodove. Plan Unije također uključuje obuku i opremu libijske obalske straže, tješnju saradnju Europske unije sa državama Sjeverne Afrike radi usporavanja priliva izbjeglica i podršku lokalnim zajednicama na izbjegličkim rutama. Ibrahim Sofić, Al Jazeera.
U nastavku razgovaramo sa šefom libijske misije Međunarodne organizacije za migraciju. Iz Tunisa se uključuje gospodin Othman Belbeisi. Mr. Belbeisi, thank you so much for joining us now. Would you agree that Libya has become a major transit route for refugees and migrants making their way from Africa to Europe? And if so, how has it come to this?
First, thank you for the opportunity. As we know, Libya has historically been a transit and a destination for migrants from different parts of the world. So Libya has always been a large labor market for labor force and for people looking for better opportunities. We have seen some increase in numbers in the last few years, but the number also has almost been stable in the last 3-4 years, or we're talking about 2014, 15, and 16. So it varies between 150,000 and 180,000 migrants. The increase in numbers are due to different factors. Definitely, we can link it to the situation at the countries of origin and the change in the economic and security situation in many countries, and also the situation inside Libya now and the current political and security challenges the country faces.
Does Libya receive the necessary help from the European Union and from NATO?
With the current situation on the ground, I would say it is very hard to control the situation on the ground now with the conflict and what we realize. When we talk about support, we definitely need to talk about support at different levels. From my side, I would focus on the humanitarian side. And for me, any support should follow the humanitarian principles of independence, impartiality, and neutrality, which means we definitely need to provide support to Libya, but we also need to consider the human rights of the Libyans, of the displaced Libyans and the vulnerable population in need, but also of those migrants who most of the times end up in detentions or being deported.
Is Libya able to cope with the rising refugee flow on its own?
Currently, Libya is facing major challenges with the decline of oil prices and the oil production, high rate of unemployment, the decline in the exchange rate of the Libyan dinars, also and the fact that there are more than 300,000 displaced Libyans in the country, which makes it difficult for the government to focus on the main priorities. So the main priorities for the government now would be restoring security, but also the provision of basic services. You have electricity cuts, water cuts, and services does not reach many parts of the country. So with the current situation, it is challenging for Libya, and Libya would need support. And that's why we always call for support of the Libyan authorities to deal with issues related to migration, knowing that migration is not a phenomenon that needs to be stopped, as our Director General always says, but the migration is a reality that needs to be managed, and migration has always contributed to the development of Libya and of many other countries.
2016 was one of the deadliest years for migrants and refugees making their way from Africa across the Mediterranean to Europe. Now, how do you explain the large number of people that have drowned, more than 7,000 in 2016? What makes an average man risk his life to make it from Africa and the Middle East to Europe?
Thank you for the question. As you rightly mentioned, people are risking their lives at sea because they did not find any better solution. And this is, you can put it in different categories. So those people who left their home countries looking for better opportunity in any of the countries along the route, but due to the difficulties and the difficult situation, especially in Libya, they found themselves between two options. Either to go back home empty-handed with nothing, and most of the times under debt, because sometimes people borrow money to finance their trip, or take the sea because they have no other option. So not all the people in Libya wanted immediately to go to Europe, or this was their only option. But due to the change of the situation in Libya, ongoing conflict, deterioration of the situation, many decided to take the boats. Now, why do we see increasing deaths? Also because the smugglers are using non-seaworthy boats. Those boats are not equipped for such trip. This is first. Those boats are overcrowded, and most of the times there is no captain or pilot to sail the boat. And I believe more needs to be done by all parties and all actors to stop deaths at sea. From Libya alone, last year, the statistics shows about 4,500 deaths.
Right, Mr. Belbesi, thank you so much for speaking to us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Poštovani gledalci, bio je to Othman Belbesi iz Međunarodne organizacije za migraciju. Budućnost Libije je neizvjesna i ovisi o više faktora. Najvažniji su formiranje jedinstvene vlade u Tripoliju i stavljanje svih oružanih grupa pod zajedničku komandu i kontrolu. Tek tada bi se stekli uvjeti da libijske sigurnosne snage uvedu red i mir u državi, ojačaju granice i obalnu stražu i zaštite naftna postrojenja. Bilo je to sve u ovom izdanju emisije Granice istoka. Cijelu emisiju možete pogledati na našem web portalu aljazeera.net/Balkans. Hvala na pažnji.